and sworn in as Premier 2 years ago this July. And what a ride it's been. Heading a minority government over these 20 months, John has shown what strength of character plus social democratic values can do. Just listen to this brief record. BC is forecast to lead the country in economic growth this year and next. Last year, BC had the highest average wage increase for its workers at 4.1% in the province. Last year also, it had Canada's lowest unemployment rate at 4.7%. And what about social programming? Instead of cutbacks in education, health, and childcare, as we're experiencing here in Ontario, millions have been spent by the BC government to provide across-the-board improvements in all these areas. Instead of just talking about improvements for First Nations, his government has negotiated new deals in self-government, strongly supported by First Nations leaders in BC and out. Instead of just relying on the market mechanism, his government's initiatives have seen a near 7% drop in the price of single-family homes in Vancouver area during the past 6 months, a 7% drop given his leadership. And instead of ignoring global warming, the government has launched a whole variety of programs supported by environmentalists throughout the province. It's doing its best to deal with global warming instead of ignoring it. And guess what? And I want to say this to any liberals or conservatives that might pick up some information from this conference. In Canada, his government has done all of this, all of the above I just mentioned, and has a AAA credit rating with the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the country. He balanced the books. As a social democrat, and the guy admires him so much, I am very proud to give you now the leader of a wonderful social democratic government in British Columbia, John Horgan.
It looks like my head's on the screen. Hi. Good morning, Ottawa. Good morning, Ed. Thank you so much. I'll wait for the applause to die down. That's it's almost like question period. I want to thank you, Ed, for that warm introduction. It is great to be back here at the Progress Summit. I had hoped to be there in person, of course. Regrettably, you did highlight the minority government we have here, and I need to be here for votes. We're in the legislature right now, making life better for British Columbians, and we need to keep doing that. But it's great to have the technology to beam into Ottawa. I'm a big Star Trek fan, as many people will know, so I expected more of a transmorgification of some kind, but a transhorganification will have to do. A couple of laughs there, that's good. We have a delay on the laughter, so you'll have to help me out with that. I'm pleased to be here to talk today about populism from the left. I have been of the view for a considerable period of time that populism should not be the sole purview of the right. The right has co-opted many, many initiatives that should rightly be left of center issues or progressive issues. I remember very vividly working with Ed in the late 80s and the early 90s with the advent of the Reform Party, a Western protest group, as the CCF-NDP had been before it. And the Reform coalition of conservatives and so-called progressives literally wiped out New Democrats right across Western Canada. And so from that point to this day, I've been trying to find a way for progressive social democrats to take back that ground that we ceded to right-wingers back in the 80s and 90s and the early part of this century. And we did that by listening to people. We always said during the election campaign of 2017 that our superpower was people. If we responded to the issues that were raised by the public, not in a pandering way, but in a genuine way, addressing the things that we heard on the streets. And if you've been in opposition for an interminable period of time, as I had with my colleagues, you get a lot of time to listen to disgruntled British Columbians. But the right has been historically been able to take that anger, that frustration, that hopelessness, and somehow put forward simplistic bromides that would make people comfortable or hopeful that voting for the right would realize the challenges and the changes that they wanted to see. Well, that didn't happen, and it doesn't happen. It's not happening in Ontario today. It won't happen in other jurisdictions across Canada going forward. What we were able to do in British Columbia was campaign on issues that were relevant to people. Wherever we went, we heard about affordability, whether it was housing, whether it was finding accessible, quality, affordable childcare, whatever it might be, people were spending more and getting further and further behind. Their wages were flat, their prospects were dim, their hopelessness seemed to be growing. We also heard over and over again, as right-wing governments cut services, that people were concerned that their kids' classrooms were too crowded, that seniors' care was not there for their parents when they needed it. So those families in the middle, and I don't say that in a linear political or ideological way, the big chunk of people that are just scraping to get ahead were not seeing themselves reflected in the policies of the Social Democrats here in British Columbia. So we turned that on its head, and we campaigned to make life more affordable, to make services available to people wherever they may be, and most importantly, make the economy work for them. Not just in a day-by-day precarious work type of way, but create an economy that mattered to people because they were full participants in it. So we crisscrossed the province. We talked about the issues that the public wanted to hear. And again, I say this not in a pandering way, but in a real way. And it started, ironically or happily, 3 years ago at the Progress Summit in Ottawa, where I announced that if we were elected government, we would implement $10 a day childcare, and that's exactly what we're doing here in British Columbia today. That's a clap line. There you go. Delay on the clap line. I want to thank Sharon Gregson. I want to thank Sharon Gregson for her relentless pursuit of $10 a day childcare. Having advocates that were passionate, were focused, and bringing forward their issues year after year after year made our transition from not very good childcare to quality, accessible, affordable childcare a seamless transition for a new government. And we did a whole host of other issues as well. We reduced barriers for people's success. We want to see everyone realize their full potential. The first way you do that is you provide opportunities for skills upgrades in a transitional economy. We have, of course, foundational industries in British Columbia, mining, forestry, gas, these resource industries that have been the backbone of our economy and continue to be so. But we also have an exploding tech sector. And that technology is not just restricted to gaming, gamers, video games, not the gambling kind of gaming, but video games and those types of tech change. It's also happening in industry. And so taking tech change in the Lower Mainland across British Columbia and seeing it realized in communities brings people along. So rather than being fearful of tech change, people were embracing tech change. Their children are embracing tech change. And instead of leaving British Columbia because it's an unaffordable jurisdiction, people were seeing housing prices, as Ed say, start to moderate, start to come down. We put in place protections for renters, as well as working with landlords. We put in place programs that would allow people that don't have the skills they need or the language skills they need access to training at no cost, because any cost, even if it's a minor cost, is a barrier and impediment to success for individuals and success for our economy. And lastly, we wanted to make sure that the economy worked for everybody. That meant rebalancing the labor code. That meant increasing the minimum wage and bringing in changes to employment standards to ensure that safety in the workplace, workers' compensation, and a whole raft of other issues that had been ignored by the former government were being embraced by the new government. And the public responded to that by saying, let's do more. And so every month that's gone by since our swearing in July of 2017 has been another month of making progress on issues that matter to people. And it's fundamental to success, I believe, on the left or on the progressive movement, that we respond to people's needs as soon as we possibly can. Talk about it all the time. Engage with people in their workplace. Engage with people at the hockey rink, at the dance recital, in the shopping center. Don't allow a comment to go by when you're standing in line. Turn around and engage with people in a positive way. People have called me a happy warrior. They've said that I I seem to be constantly smiling. And why not? This is such a tremendous opportunity for here in British Columbia to transform our communities and our society and make the just society that we on the left and the progressive movements have been talking about for generations. It's just a thrill to have the opportunity to talk about these issues with you today. I know Ed's going to have a number of questions for me, and I'm usually better in that format anyway. Staring into a video camera and hearing sporadic laughter and periodic clapping is not the best way to talk. So I'll open it up to questions from Ed, and thank you so much for having me in this unorthodox way.
Bon. Bonjour, je m'appelle Edward Greenspan. Je suis ravi d'être ici aujourd'hui. I want to just sort of say that it's especially thrilling to be introduced by Ed Broadbent, one of my political heroes. And it's especially thrilling to be introduced by Ed Broadbent on the week of my birthday as a 33-year-old, which is he's a very, very generous man. I think that's social democracy in action, actually. So that's great. And I'm delighted to be able to have a chat with you as well, John. So I'm got to look, hi everybody, I have to look at a monitor here, a monitor there, and a camera there. So it's not, I'm trying not to be rude to you, but I only have so much mobility at 33, so there we go. Hi, John, how are you? Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you. We've met. And Premier Horgan was kind enough to be at our Public Policy Forum Western dinner several months ago, I guess, late last year. And he is a people person. He knocked us completely off schedule by not leaving when he was supposed to leave and wanting to talk to everybody in the room. And it was a great pleasure having him. Left-wing populism. Let's start there in a way. So we have provincial governments in Ontario, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Quebec, and perhaps Alberta that have moved more to the right over recent time than toward the left. So what are they doing wrong? What's happening, not happening there that's happening in BC?
Well, I believe that our success was, as I said, a result of responding to the needs of people. We had a long period in opposition. I was 12 years as an opposition member, and so I was well versed in the challenges of people in my own community and communities right across BC. And we tailored our campaign and our platform to the issues that mattered to people. And affordability was that fundamental issue. Again, right-wing populists, so Mr. Ford and others like him, said they were going to make a buck for a bottle of beer, and they were going right to that pandering populism that works so effectively for right-of-center politicians. So how were we as progressives going to take back the agenda of people? Well, we didn't do it in a way of saying, here's your recreational couple of pennies. We said, we're going to eliminate medical services premiums, the last province in the country to have a flat tax that took money out of people's pockets at the same rate, whether they made $400,000 a year or $40,000 a year. So that became a symbolic issue. Let's get rid of medical services premiums. And on January 1st of next year, they will be gone. That's $1,800 in the pockets of families, the largest middle-class tax cut in BC history. But we didn't characterize it as a tax cut. We characterized it as fairness. And we increased the marginal tax rate for high-income earners. We increased the carbon tax, which was a commitment that we made so that we could meet our climate change objectives, among a whole host of other Clean BC initiatives. Okay, but we focused on trying to reduce costs for people, and that meant getting rid of these unfair levies. And that's what the right always does. They talk about, I'm going to make your life more affordable, and they always increase costs and reduce services. We turn that on its head by reducing costs and increasing services, and the public has responded, as you can well imagine, with a great deal of enthusiasm. So I would argue that in other jurisdictions, follow that same roadmap. People are your superpower. Listen to them, trust them, and follow what they say, and you'll be successful.
So do you think generally that the left around the world has trouble with pocketbook issues, has trouble talking about pocketbook issues? Is that the language of the left?
Well, I agree that you look at the evidence around the world, we see left-of-center governments failing or left-of-center parties not being successful because we've allowed the right to take the populism away from us. And I was attracted to the CCF-NDP through the work of the League of Social Reconstruction in the 1930s. I'm geeking out already. It's so early in the day to be doing that. But it was the ideas and the values of those people in the 30s and the 40s that brought me to the CCF-NDP, and was working with people like Ed Broadbent, who represented one of the most working class communities you can imagine in Ontario, the hotbed of the auto industry in Oshawa. It was Ed's understanding of the need of working people, and not again as just a tagline or a billboard or a bumper sticker, but what matters to the people in my community. I believe if you step away from that and focus instead on the existential issues that sometimes consume a lot of our debates on the left, you lose sight of what matters to people. Most people, I live by the adage, Ed, you wouldn't worry what people thought of you if you knew how seldomly they did, because they're worrying about their family and their community. And we need, as politicians, to step into that discussion right on the front lines. And that means not just yelling at the building, which I've done a lot of in my time, but getting inside the building and affecting positive change for people.
All right. So it's interesting. I know the applause is on delay, but you're getting some good applause on the room. Okay. It's interesting that you mentioned Ed Broadbent's riding, Oshawa, because Oshawa is obviously going through a difficult time right now, and it's part, I think, of the global trend and the future of work kinds of issues. So how do you deal with that level of economic anxiety, which is, obviously not misplaced? The economies are changing, and people who have been accustomed to a certain kind of livelihood are seeing that under jeopardy. So what are you doing about that broader question?
Well, certainly we are in a time of transition. I talked about our traditional resource industries that are in transition. We've had two of the worst fire seasons in BC history, 2 million hectares of forest burned. That has an impact not just on the economy, but on wildlife and on communities, on recreation, a whole range of issues. And when you have those crisis moments, as we're having in the auto industry in Ontario, you need to come forward with solutions that aren't just about 6-week training programs, but giving people hope. And that hopefulness is, I think, oftentimes missing from our rhetoric. When we're in opposition, of course, we have to rail against the machine, and that's to be commended. But at some point, you want to take over the machine. And to do that, you have to demonstrate that you have some ideas that people can get behind. And when you're in transition, you need to be able to say, we're not just going to give you a 6-week training program. We're going to stay with you until we can find a place for you in the economy. The economy is about people at the end of the day. It's not just about spreadsheets. It's not just about profit margins. It's about people. And again, if we focus on those issues, the public, those that are in a period of transition from what they know to the uncertain future, we need to be beside them every step of the way. And that's how you have success. Not just saying, oh, well, we're going to change. We're not going to make cars in Oshawa anymore. Let's find something else to do. It's about what do we do with the people who used to make cars in Oshawa. And that doesn't mean they're all going to go to a different place to do something different. It means they're going to be spreading throughout the economy, benefiting themselves, the community, the province, and the country. And that's how you have to look at disruption and the changing economy that we live in.
All right. Let's talk about LNG Canada for a moment. You're right now debating in the legislature LNG Canada. Your coalition BFF calls this, quote, a generational sellout. How do you reconcile this project and what you're talking about, pocketbook issues, with the kind of existential crisis of climate change?
Well, we have the blessing in British Columbia of having about 96% of our energy comes from hydroelectric power. So we have an electric advantage, a clean, green electric advantage in British Columbia. So when we were putting together our Clean BC initiative with our friends in the Green Party, we were doing so quite candidly with them, saying we have before us the largest private sector investment in Canadian history that will mean $40 billion of investment in northern British Columbia, where many of the forests that I talked about have been liquidated by fire or by aggressive forest practices over 50, 60 years. So the economy that should have been the lifeblood of Indigenous communities, for example, from the Alberta border to Tidewater, have been more or less taken up. And so when we talk about genuine reconciliation, we need to do more than just say, here's a social program to get you through. We need to say, here's some economic opportunity that we can build on. So when we put together our Clean BC plan, which is the most aggressive climate action plan in North America, we did it mindful of the impact of LNG to that basket of emissions. We have to be more aggressive on transportation. That's why we're spending billions of dollars in the Lower Mainland building new SkyTrain and new public transit opportunities to get people out of single occupancy vehicles and reduce the impact of the transportation sector on climate change. Our housing initiative is not just about driving down costs so people can get into homes, but retrofitting old homes to make them more energy efficient, to reduce the emissions profile from the housing sector. And so on the industrial side, we sat down with the BC Business Council, which is representative of the largest employers, the largest businesses in BC, and we said, we'll proceed with LNG Canada if it fits within our mandate, which is to ensure that we get the maximum benefit from those resources. They belong to the people of BC, that BC workers are first in line, apprenticeship opportunities there for training the next generation. Indigenous people are full participants, and it fits within the climate plan. And the Business Council said, well, we need this investment. We want to demonstrate to the world that BC is open for business, and we also want to meet the objectives you've laid out for us on climate change. So that means that the industrial sector has to do its part to reduce emissions as well. Forestry, mining, the cement sector, housing, all of that is now working with LNG Canada to fit into the box.
So to some extent, though, it sounds what you're saying is that there's a balancing act here, not very different from what the Prime Minister has been saying, perhaps in a different context. And you are moving toward targets, but I think you're still at least 6 megatons short of where you have to be by hitting your targets, and LNG Canada will add more megatons to it. So you're walking a bit of a tightrope here. Do you need to do that in order to keep people on side because of the pocketbook issues you talk about?
Well, keeping people on side is the whole point, Ed. I mean, I didn't get into public life
is there a climate plan?
to meet targets to say that I've met what Paris asked us to do. I got into public life to work with people. And if we don't bring the public along, whether it be by giving rebates to low-income British Columbians with respect to climate or carbon pricing, which we've had in BC for the past decade, if it means saying to people, you have to get out of your car, but someone else can stay in their car, then people are going to resist that. We've had these 2 horrific fire seasons. We see snow in Victoria in March, not a usual phenomenon. The public understands in British Columbia. We're a sophisticated environmental community. We understand as a broader population the challenges of climate change, but we can't dictate to people how we're going to do this. We have to work with people and bring them along. And I believe the balancing act that you talk about is the only way forward. It's the only way we're going to realize success. And I just want to highlight, because it's important, Joan Sawicki was the Green Environment Minister under Glenn Clark, and she had the first climate action plan in North America after the Kyoto Protocol. So New Democrats have been leading on climate change for a long, long time. Now to have the opportunity to put in place programs to reduce emissions and also continue to grow the economy is pretty exciting for me.
Okay. I think you got like about 60% applause, maybe. I think that's good. Hard issue to reconcile. That's good. I think that's a good number. Even higher than your approval rating, apparently. So there we go.
Yeah.
John, when you took power, one of the huge issues, and still a huge issue in British Columbia, was housing affordability. You've taken a lot of measures there. One could, I guess, say jokingly that housing prices in Vancouver are down to an average of $2 million, but that's from $3 million. So I guess it is moving in the right direction in that way. Nonetheless, a lot of people keep coming into the province. A lot of people come into Canada. Vancouver is a very attractive place in Canada. What do you need to get more action on the supply side?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, we had this runaway growth in housing prices, not just in the Lower Mainland, but in the South Island, in the Okanagan Valley, a very desirable place to live as well. and largely driven by speculation, outside speculation. And one of the key components of our housing plan is to clamp down on that speculation, get it out of the market, and we've seen positive success. We have a speculation and vacancy tax here. 99% of British Columbians will not be affected by that, and everyone knows that everyone loves a tax that doesn't affect them, and so that's been a positive. We've got enormous success. I think it's 70% support for speculation taxes because people don't own 2 and 3 homes by and large. The other issue that's critically important is to make sure that once the market gets to a place where someone can jump into it, they immediately want the market to go up. And that's the big balance again. If you're in the market, you want it to always go up. If you're not in the market, you want it to come down so you can get in. But as soon as you get in, you want it to shoot back up again. Human nature is, this is an asset. This could be my retirement. Getting into housing in British Columbia is a tough thing to do. But people need a place to live, and we need to build more housing. So we focused on the whole continuum. We've got a modular housing program, for example, that with homes being built in the interior BC and constructed over weeks in parts of British Columbia that need low-cost housing for the hard to house. And those homes don't just come with a roof and walls, they come with programs. 24-hour services for addictions, mental health, the first province in the country to have a minister dedicated to mental health and addictions, another populist issue. These are issues that affect people's lives. And so housing is not just about the walls and the ceiling and the roof, it's also about what other services do I need if I'm going from homelessness to housing. And if I'm in the middle class, or aspiring to be in the middle class, I need to have enough supply to bring the costs down. And we're working with municipalities to shorten their decision-making times so we can get more not-for-profit and market-driven housing on the market. $7 billion we're committing to housing over the next number of years, on top of the money to childcare, money to education, money to healthcare. And these expenditures are not just to have large headlines in newspapers. It's about services for people. And if you don't lose sight of that, you're golden.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left or less, and I want to ask you a couple of things. And I know you want to talk about childcare, and I want to ask you about the childcare plan as an affordability issue. I think it's pretty obvious as part of your plan there. I just wonder what your analysis shows you might extract out of this in terms of labor market participation, in terms of a fair gender participation in the labor market.
Well, that's one of the motivations, of course, and we had an election event in front of a home in Burnaby about the size of a small office, and it was on the market for $1.2 million. And so we were there with a young couple, a mother, heavily pregnant, 2 children, 1 on the way, and they were saying they were leaving British Columbia because they couldn't find affordable housing for the growing family that they were becoming. And so we said, we're going to do something about that. We're going to address housing, and we're going to implement $10 a day childcare. Now, our Green partners didn't like the notion of $10 a day, but they did like the notion of childcare. So we've been working with them to come up with new and innovative ways to have affordable, accessible, quality childcare so that everyone can participate in the economy. Women largely don't go back to work after birth because they can't find someone to care for their most precious asset, their children. And so we turned that on its head, and we said, we're going to provide the spaces, we're going to train the early childhood educators, and we're going to transform this sector. And it's the work of people like Sharon Gregson and other advocates over the past 15 years that allowed us to make that seamless transition from opposition to government and hit the ground running on childcare. And women have responded largely. I have a gender balanced cabinet, of course, but on the 30th of January, with the election of Sheila Malcolmson, I might believe the only leader in the country that has ever been able to say half of my colleagues are men and half of my colleagues are women. And so childcare is not just a nicety when you have 50% of your colleagues are women, it's a necessity. And so we were able to drive to that position very easily, and the public is well and truly behind us because it's money in pockets. And the woman who was at that press conference in Burnaby during the election campaign, I bumped into her a year later. They found a place in Maple Ridge, they've got childcare, and they're participating in the economy. So 2 more people stayed with 3 kids, and that's success in my books.
That's great. That's great. Okay, a couple of very short snappers, politics. So I mentioned your approval rating. 52%, I think, is what the latest poll shows. And You're
Is that all?
Yeah, that's all so far. Yeah, yeah. You're doing better in this room, but I think 52% after 2 years in British Columbia is pretty good. And it has been about 2 years. Why not go to an election?
Well, I didn't get involved in public life to perpetuate myself election to election. I tried to form a government with Carol James in 2005. I tried again in 2009. I tried to form a government with Adrian Dix in 2013, and we were successful in 2017. And again, I am so fortunate to have my two strongest cabinet ministers. My Minister of Health is Adrian Dix. My Deputy Premier and Finance Minister is Carol James. So two former leaders at my side going forward, and the three of us and all of our colleagues want to continue to make progress. And, you know, this sounds odd, I know, but being in a minority situation makes us work harder. It means that we have to craft policies that have a broader support. The Greens have helped us in that regard. This past week, it's Liberals that are voting with us. Again, I'm surprised by that, but I'm not disappointed. I believe the public is responding to my leadership and my government because we're not just about us, we're about them. And I'm not looking for an election because it's not about me. It's not about perpetuating the party, it's about making progress for people. And every day that I get an opportunity to do that is a day that I just cherish. And I'm not going to put that to chance. As long as I can continue to work with Mr. Weaver and the Liberals, if required, to bring forward policies that help people, I'm going to keep doing that.
Okay, well, I will. This is a rare comment in Canadian politics, but I will infer from that that you'd be happy to just go normal course, full term, as if you had a majority, as long as it keeps working. That's, I think, what you're saying.
That's the plan. That's the plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We intend to continue governing until the fall of 2021, when we will have a general election, and we will do our level best to, again, not focus on us, not focus on the party, but focus on people. And I think that makes the party stronger. As I travel around BC, I say, and I've been saying this since I became leader, BC's full of New Democrats. They just don't know it yet. And the longer we keep talking to them about the issues that matter to them, the more likely they're going to say, I see myself reflected with those people. I'm going to vote for them.
Yeah. Just speaking of that province full of New Democrats, will you campaign for the federal New Democrats in the upcoming election?
I am so excited with Jagmeet Singh and the new leadership that he's brought to the NDP caucus in Ottawa. I'm going to be doing my level best to help my friend Randall Garrison, who's in my constituency, Alistair McGregor in my constituency, and New Democrats right across British Columbia. We need to continue to have a strong progressive voice in Ottawa from British Columbia, and I believe the best way to do that is to vote for the NDP. I know this is a nonpartisan event, but that's certainly where I roll, and I'm going to keep rolling that way.
Yeah. The event may be nonpartisan. I think the audience may not be just nonpartisan, a bit beyond that. And you, of course, are allowed to be partisan. So I want to thank you very much for your time and your participation on behalf of everyone here. And good luck with your agenda and your time in the legislature. I know you can never leave town. So glad to have you this way.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Well, thank you so much, Ed. Thank you to all those assembled in Ottawa. And most importantly, I want to just say thank you to Ed Broadbent for continuing to be a strong leader of progressive values and ideas in Canada. You're an inspiration, Ed. I'm delighted to see you, even if it's on a tiny, tiny screen here in the library at the Legislature in Victoria.
There we go. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
My name's Scott Marks, and I'm here representing the International Association of Firefighters, and I'm here